We're kicking things off with a topic that underpins everything else we'll discuss today, energy. Without it, none of the AI, logistics, or commerce innovations we're about to talk about are possible. So let's start at the foundation. Please welcome to the stage our moderator, Ben Dusastre, CFO of Harbinger, and he'll be joined by panelists Sarah Salati of National Grid Ventures, Elena Brookstein, SVP of Grid Care, and Gary Ung, founder and CEO of Celodyne. This session is presented by Lineage Logistics.
Good morning. So we're here today to have this panel called Essentialism of Energy. We're going to discuss how this exploding demand in power, driven partly by data centers, defense, and everything else, is creating challenges for the grid. Today we're going to hear from different points of views. We have one of the largest power players in the country, NG Ventures, from the point of view of two Dynamo portfolio startups, one a hardware one, Celodyne, and one an AI software one, Grid Care AI. I'm Ben Dusastre from Harbinger. We are one of the SoCal hard techs. We're known principally for making EV trucks. So why am I moderating a panel on energy and the grid? Well, like Boom Supersonic, who took its jet engine and is turning it into generators, Harbinger is the only EV trucking company in the world that makes electric motors in-house. And so we're turning this big 650 kilowatt electric stator that we have in our truck into a generator, specifically focused on data centers because our EV architecture is 800 volts, and the new NVIDIA GPUs are running on 800 volt DC power. I'm going to ask each one of the companies here to introduce themselves.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Yesterday, when I was sitting in front of my computer, I talked to people about tomorrow being Friday. So as far as I'm concerned, I've already skipped this day. Nice to see you. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Sarah Salati. I'm with National Grid Ventures. We are the competitive arm of National Grid, which is a UK-headquartered company that owns transmission and distribution utilities both in the US as well as in the UK. Specifically in the Ventures portfolio, it's anything that falls out of our regulated utilities, which are in gas and electric, both in New York State and in Massachusetts, where we serve 20 million customers. The Ventures portfolio includes energy infrastructure across the value chain, so LNG facility in Rhode Island, conventional generation and renewables in New York State, as well as bulk transmission in the Northeast and now moving into the Mid-Atlantic, as well as the Midwest. We think, consequently, we have a unique vantage point because we have the final ratepayers that are supporting the energy infrastructure that we're building. We understand what it takes to deliver large energy infrastructure and ultimately to own, operate, and optimize it. So look forward to the conversation today.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Elena Brookstein. I lead sales and go-to-market at Grid Care. We are a venture-backed startup and effectively an AI platform looking at the grid at a very granular level to unlock latent capacity on the grid. I was the foundational go-to-market hire, have been building the go-to-market team for about 9 months, almost a year now. We've just announced this morning a $64 million capital raise to allow us to scale in this space. Just a little bit of background, joined from AWS where I led Corp Dev for energy and really sat at the center of how AI can create value for energy companies, but at the same time create such an unprecedented demand for AI workloads, specifically for data centers. And the premise behind Grid Care that I'm so excited to talk about today is that by leveraging that AI, both foundational models and agentic solutions, you can actually understand the grid, support utilities, not work against them, but actually work alongside them to uncover hidden capacity on the grid. Some of the foundational wins we've had in the market, being a small company, already have 400 megawatts under management, coming from work we did with utilities that were initially telling data centers there was zero capacity to be allocated until 2035. By actually looking at the grid, challenging the premise that the grid runs today at about 30% utilization, operating more at the margin margin, running about a quadrillion scenarios, we're able to unlock an additional incremental 400 megawatts that resulted in 5 net new interconnection agreements and tremendous value for the economy. So really excited to be here today, talk about what we're doing, and talk about what comes next.
Testing. Oh, this works. Great. So I'm Gary Ong. I'm the founder and CEO of Solidyne. So we're a deep tech materials company. So you might be wondering why I'm here. So we stand at the platform piece where we basically enable these class of technologies called electrochemical technologies. So the one that you're most familiar with is probably what's a battery. That's an electrochemical technology. And our premise here is that if you can improve the platform, you can improve the materials in it, you can make all of these technologies much better. And it's important for you to make them better because that's the foundational technology on the hardware piece that lets you store energy and convert energy into chemical fuels or anything that's related to the physical world. Right? So if you care about electrons, but then eventually you want to use something that's not just an electron, you care about what we do. And for us, we don't just sit in the commercial space. We actually have Department of Defense contracts too. So we also help the Department of Defense think through energy constraints on their side there. And I think there are a lot of lessons learned from that field that can be ported into the commercial space. So looking forward to share more.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask this question to all of you guys, but we'll start with Sarah. How is National Grid Ventures addressing this challenge regarding this huge load growth? And a question I get asked a lot is, do you think this is temporary?
Thanks. So I would say the National Grid Ventures approaches it in 3 ways. When we look at our expertise in high voltage transmission, we actually have the world's largest portfolio of subsea high voltage direct current transmission lines in the world, connecting mainland Europe with the UK, including one that's in the Guinness Book of World Records, which is always fun to talk about, 475 miles between the UK and Denmark, called Viking Link. I wasn't part of the branding on that, but it's catchy. And so really where we're looking to help support is really moving the energy where it's produced, right? All of the above, whether it's solar, wind, onshore, offshore, TBD, conventional generation, nuclear, to the load centers. And that really is where high voltage transmission can come to play. And so we look to continue to work in the Mid-Atlantic, in the Midwest, in the Northeast, and nationally to bring that expertise to bear and to fund, develop, own, and operate these billion-dollar infrastructure investments. The second area, I would say, and if you build transmission effectively, you're really providing the most cost-efficient way to generate and transport electricity. The second way would be with generation. I mentioned conventional generation. We used to be solely talking about kind of renewables and moving off fossil fuels. Clearly that's not realistic and practical, right? We still need the transition, so it's leveraging the fact that we own and operate conventional generation in addition to renewables and helping to develop, own, and operate those assets. And that's very specifically tied to the load growth that we're seeing across the nation, and the ability to provide the power services to the data centers that want to build. So that can be front of the meter, or that can be behind the meter, more microgrid and kind of energy campuses. And we have, again, the technology and the commercial acumen to do that. The third area I would say, and it's more conceptual, is partnerships. National Grid doesn't do any of our large infrastructure projects without partners. Every single one of our high voltage projects is as a result of typically 50-50 partnerships or maybe a consortium. I just put one together a year ago, and that's five entities that have come together to support the build out of particular projects. So when I think about how grid can play a role in meeting this load growth and demand, it's really the fact that we're an exceptional partner. And I say that having been in multiple companies and seeing partnerships that didn't work well, where you didn't have alignment. But what I think that grid is particularly good at is identifying entities with whom we have cultural fits and providing a synergistic experience and expertise such that we're all rowing in the same direction and can achieve the commercial objectives that we have. And I use the 2 panelists here on my side, and I'll talk about National Grid Partners later, but we have partnered with both of these companies to support advancing technology on the grid.
Great. No, I definitely want to talk about our partnership and some of the great work we've done together. So let's make sure we have time on the panel and appreciate that. Maybe I'll start with the question of, is the demand enduring, right? And I'm happy to take that and let others weigh in. Well, look, we've all seen the projections depending on which analysts you're tracking, right? We're looking at between 3 and 14x in terms of the type of demand growth we've seen in North America to date. Even if you don't want to pick which hockey stick to jump on, you could think about it from just a hard infrastructure perspective. Each hyperscaler is projected to spend about $200 billion a year by 2030 on AI infrastructure, right? So we're looking at across just the top folks, right? $1.4 trillion of investment in 2030, and this is money, invested and already being deployed. So it is real, right? It's hard to look at those kind of numbers, $1.4 trillion in AI workload investment, and think this isn't an enduring, or at least something that's going to impact our life for the next 10 to 20 years. Second thing is you think about efficiency. Efficiency is great. You also think about increase in demand. We can all have the debate, but the ongoing innovation that we all want in our lives is being fueled by AI. It is very hard to see a lack of significant growth across the board. Two more comments on this. One is that it almost doesn't matter to an average utility if the growth is at 2x or 10x. What matters is that they're being asked locally to serve a gigawatt of load overnight, which is something they've never done before, and they haven't been built for. And if they're going to compete with their neighboring states, drive that economic development and drive that growth, they need to find a way to respond. And that's where solutions like GridCare comes in to think about how you can actually use more of what you have on the table today. So even if you don't see even growth across North America or across the globe, I would argue that you will see that consistent growth. You're going to see huge pockets in certain parts of North America that are going to continue to grow. Are there potentially fluff in the curve, right? Are there bad actors, or are there people holding places in the queue that aren't real? Yes. My opinion is yes. There are people who are prospecting, who are holding positions in interconnection queues with the hope that they're going to sell it to some off-taker in the future, and that is taking up space, and it is causing any individual utility that's looking at their interconnection queue to come back with something that almost doesn't make sense. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It's too big. But what does that mean? That means the bad actors or the people holding or the prospectors will fall out. That's froth on the bubble. That's not a bubble. And happy to talk more about that, and also just in terms of how you forecast AI workload growth. What was the second part of the question?
What is your company doing to address it?
Absolutely. Okay. So clearly I have an opinion about the growth and whether it's enduring or not, and happy to go deeper on that. So what does GridCare do? So what we have built in the market is a very unique approach to understand with a native AI model that's built from the ground up, so you don't have any legacy silo issues, legacy data issues, all coming out of Stanford for multiple years, as it's been grown up over time. A pre-trained model that's able to analyze the grid from the transmission, distribution, sub-transmission level to understand how you can take grids that are typically operating at about 30% utilization. That's by design, it's not an insult, right? Grids are built to hit the one peak of the year. How you can take them and allow them to operate closer to that transmission limit without ever creating any violations.
So there's 70% available?
Yes, if you look at the WEC study, so the West Coast coming out of Stanford, we're looking at 30% utilization. It varies by utility.
What is that in gigawatts for the country?
I don't
enough to solve the demand problem.
Yeah, quite a big number. In fact, I'm sure I should know the number. I'm a bit jet lagged, but absolutely.
I don't know it either.
Yeah, no, it's a big number. And again, you can debate. I mean, it depends on the utility, right? But it's by design, right? You're building an infrastructure to hit that peak. Either it's a seasonal peak or an annual peak, and you are absolutely not running at full efficiency. However, your planning systems are all optimizing to that one peak. If you can look at a more granular view of your entire grid and think about how you can challenge some of those core assumptions you make in terms of planning, because you can now see so much more and you can run so many more scenarios using AI, you can challenge assumptions about getting closer and closer to that transmission limit without actually creating any violations. Second is you can jump into this world that everyone is talking about, which is flexibility. The concept that a data center does not need to be a static asset. It can actually behave as, it could potentially curtail, it can switch to backup power, it can switch to BESS. You could have actually workload ramp up and down inside a data center. If you can create that kind of flexibility, there is no debate that that's a good or a bad thing. Flexibility is almost by any definition, a good thing. However, what we're able to do is think about that and translate it into actual capacity. So if you can bring flexibility to the table, you can run about, I think, 29 quadrillion scenarios to optimize for every hour of every day against every single contingency, to understand that if you bring a 30 megawatt battery to the table as a data center, can that get you 500 incremental megawatts in this decade? And the answer is so far turning out to be yes. So short answer is using AI to think about the grid differently, partnering with utilities, and would love to talk more about what we're doing with National Grid New York today, to help them get a better utilization and create more opportunities without additional build. I say that there's plenty of demand in the system to allow all the transmission build that we want to do. We really want to grow rate base for our utility partners. However, you can deploy and actually allocate what you have on the grid today at zero cost.
And how long does that take? So like if you're going to use software to fix that problem, is it like a 5-year solution or is it very quick?
The analysis itself is super quick, right? We're in the world of AI. We're talking about ingesting data from our utility partners and supplementing what they do today with additional analysis. It's that process is, a matter of months to run the analysis, make sure everyone understands assumptions and get sign off and make sure it's all FERC compliant. What you're trying to do is trying to optimize against what assets you have today and what assets you need to build. So it depends on what headroom's in the system and also if you need to bring additional flexibility to the table. In 4 of the 5 cases we've done to date, that flexibility is additional permitting for diesel gensets. That can take a little bit of time, but that's 6 to 9 months depending on the market. In another case, you're looking at implementing a battery energy storage system that has 9 to 12 month lead time. So I think it really depends on what you're building. The analysis is quick. The deploying it is laser fast compared to the alternative, which is building incremental transmission lines.
Yeah, that's pretty quick. So Gary, fuel cells. So Bloom Energy is like $90 billion. That stock's up like 10 times in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think.
So how do we use your technology for these problems?
I think everyone here wished they just bought Bloom last year.
Yes.
Probably would have 10x your money. Fundamentals for them in terms of tech didn't change, but the demand pool is real, right? Because I think, so we have connections to all the major engine makers, turbine makers, and everything like that too. And I can tell you, they're not actually planning to ramp up production, not really. So this thinking that, maybe if I wait 2 years, I'll get a turbine, yeah, it's not coming. So you need to find different solutions. So the short version is so we see that too. I don't think I can disclose this, but I can tell you that I can't say what we're doing in it, but I can say Honda is doing fuel cells for data centers, because that's public. So it has direct implications there. But kind of going back to what the 2 speakers were talking about previously, about how, at the end of the day, when you plan the grid, right now, the peaks are what defines how you plan everything. So the question becomes, how you can shave off of the peak and make things more level. And, you basically need to deploy new mechanisms to store energy, to basically kind of shave off that peak. The one that everyone knows about is lithium ion. Very mature, but the problem with lithium ion is that it's very easy to deploy lithium ion, say 1 megawatt, maybe even 10 megawatts. Now you suddenly go, I want 100 megawatts. That doesn't sound that bad yet, and then you go, well, it's actually 100 megawatts, but then data centers, you brought it up, diesel gensets, 24 hours. So I was like, so I don't need 100 megawatts, I need 2,400 megawatts hours. That battery system, I don't think any CEO wants to sign that check. It's not feasible. It's too high. It's too expensive. So what do we do there? Right? We've had inbounds to basically use our technology to convert it into a round-trip energy storage device that would actually work for data centers. So the reason why fuel cells, electrolysis, flow batteries, and things like that are interesting is because the amount of energy you get to store is fundamentally decoupled from the method of making the power. It's very similar to a traditional gas turbine system, where you have a turbine that makes the power, but you have a very, very cheap tank that stores the energy. That's literally the mechanism of how everything other than lithium ion works. And that's the mechanism we're trying to enable, so that you can actually store enough power to do things like backup power, where you're now competing against diesel gensets, but you can actually run these now because you don't have to worry about the environmental regulations. And then on top of that, do it at a price point where some CEO or CFO will actually be willing to sign the check.
But like the Bloom solution is like 3 times more expensive than on CapEx than diesel gensets.
It is. So this is actually a good one. I can kind of segue into the military angle of it. So
Like most of your revenue today is defense, right?
that's right. Yeah.
So in LA, like most of the capital that I see being raised is in defense tech today. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is like something that you see in defense for the last, I want to say, 100 years. But the commercial space hasn't really seen yet, which is defense has always paid a really, really heavy premium on CapEx and OpEx for capability. That's it, right? To give you a sense, we complain when gas is $6 a gallon, right? A gallon of gas in Afghanistan in an unsecured area is about 150. A Humvee or a light tactical vehicle has 7 miles per gallon. So you can do the math of how expensive it is to operate this thing. Yet, they buy the fuel, you run the mission. Because the perspective of how a purchasing decision is made is focused on the capability you enable. So I think AI is actually kind of bringing that framework into the commercial market, where you're kind of seeing it, right? Like now suddenly all the hyperscalers are like, I will pay triple the price of power, triple the CapEx, because the capability I'm trying to enable far exceeds the price I'm willing to pay, right? And defense has always operated that way. This is just the first inkling of it in the commercial market.
One of the things I hear why people like that Bloom solution is it puts out 800 volt DC power. Mm-hmm. What do you guys know about the shift from 480 three-phase AC demand to this 800 volt DC demand? Are you seeing anything in your spaces?
I'm seeing it in the NVIDIA reference design, which I think will have impact, but otherwise, no opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's somebody from NVIDIA here that I had coffee with
and then he
yesterday
can
about this.
comment on it.
Okay, cool. All right, so let me look at other questions for everybody. Do you guys do anything in defense? Like, so Gary, most of his revenue comes from defense, but are you guys doing anything in the defense space, and is it different?
Well, I mean, we are providing bulk critical energy infrastructure, right, which is confidential, right? The CEOs of our company, get high level security clearances to, talk to the government around ensuring that we're safeguarding the infrastructure that is powering every aspect of our lives. So to that end, I feel that every day that we're providing reliable, resilient power, we're supporting the defense and the economic growth of our country. Coming back to what Gary was saying, absolutely, when you think about Defense Department of War wanting to ensure that they have resiliency and reliability, you'll pay a premium for that.
And a bigger budget than ever, right?
That's right. Well, I mean, I'm going to stop there. I won't go down a rabbit hole of wars. But we see that too, right, for the data centers, right, the hyperscalers, they are willing to pay a premium as well because they want similarly reliable speed to power. And to the question that you had before, I agree with Aileen. The fundamentals are there, right? It's not a bubble. I used to think every couple of years you get a new bubble kind of in the energy sector, and hydrogen was really fancy and shiny a couple of years ago, and kind of AI arrived. But fundamentally, again, even if you handicap or discount the rate of growth. The fundamentals are still there. We're going to continue to need incremental computing power. It's not going to be people scrolling on their phones. It's going to be robots. It's going to be a lot more than what we have in front of ourselves today. So I think anybody that's working towards this, again, we won't be able to forecast exactly the growth rate, but it's going to be steady and it's going to be consistent.
And then I guess I'll add one thing on that too, because I don't think I answered the question about whether or not demand is real earlier, right? So here's kind of my framework of how I've thought about the electricity demand for AI. So kind of going back to you guys saying, right, hydrogen got really hypey in 22, right? But if you kind of take a step back and ask, why was hydrogen so hypey in 22? It was because it was under the lens of industrial electrification. That's it, right? You were like, chemicals have to electrify eventually. Industrial processes, process heat, all of that eventually have to electrify, right? That undercurrent, we don't talk about it anymore, but it hasn't gone away, right? So the investments are still happening there. So when I think about the kind of like electrification kind of angle in general, that's happening. That's not going away. So, there's that argument of, when a new technology penetrates the market, you always go for the highest value case, then the medium value case, then the lowest value case, right? The way I see it is, all we've done over the last couple of years is now AI is the highest value case. So we see it, right? But there's actually this really, really big undercurrent. And with that target thing where you're like, highest value case is up here, AI, there's these two other things down there. But if you look at the actual capacity thing on the other side of like how much of the other thing you will have, you're like, yeah, AI, they'll pay a lot of money and it's really shiny out here. But the other two, like how much energy does a steel plant use? It'll kill a data center in a heartbeat, right? And then how much does a gas plant use? It'll kill a data center in a heartbeat. It's a lot of energy there. So if now you put all that pent-up demand together and say, how much demand is there for an electron? I mean, I don't know, as much as you want, honestly.
So this higher willingness to pay is creating like a lot of innovation, right? Yesterday, Fervo went public, $7 billion, geothermal.
That's right.
I met with the SPAC company yesterday that took Oklo public, so like small scale nuclear. Also the stock up 10x in like a year. What kind of innovation are you guys seeing? I know you're an investor in GridCare. You've done a project with Celadine. What are some of the new technologies that you're looking at?
So when I look at the generation space, actually, going back to hydrogen, we're piloting linear generators, which is a non-combustible source of energy, and that can be run on hydrogen or natural gas. And we're looking at how we can, in the future, have that supply in order to ultimately shift some of our gas plants to hydrogen when we get to kind of the economic pricing that we need from the kind of supply energy side on hydrogen. Specifically, and again, it's confusing because I'm National Grid Ventures, but I'm not in the venture capital arm. That's National Grid Partners. So I can comment on National Grid Partners, which is our VC fund that has about $500 million of investment over the last 8 years, and in about 50 startups, with some of one's gone public and the others have been acquired otherwise. What I would say when I think about National Grid Ventures and really any strategic, I subscribe to the lead innovation user theory, which is we're in the market, we have the pain and the problems, and so we're able to identify and pull technologies to help us solve the problems. Frequently you have technology innovators that are in search of a problem, and that's why they're always coming to talk to the industry, either the industry in which they start or an adjacent or totally different industry, to see how they can apply their technology there. So with National Grid Partners, where we focused, and not surprising because we're talking about AI, is really the digital overlay, right? Because just as Aileen was saying, there is a massive amount of increased asset utilization that we can achieve with the digital overlay. So GridCare is a good example. We also invest in Emerald AI, which is looking at taking the load and optimizing and flexing it up and down to meet what she articulated would be needed to take advantage of the grid connection and support reducing the amount of capacity that would be needed. it basically analyzes the AI models and pulls load off that is not critical to be used, so it is flexing the data centers. Another one is using satellite technology, AI Dash, which is helping monitor our infrastructure, including trees. And just by using that technology, we've reduced tree-related outages by 30% in our regulated utilities. For transmission, we have line vision, which is dynamic line ratings, which are trying to push power, optimal amounts of power through based on actual data and not hypothetical calculations relative to how much load can be carried or current can be carried through lines. And then Exodigo is another one where it's using different types of sensors that can look underground and really understand the energy infrastructure there, so you don't have a contractor that's building a house that accidentally cuts into an electric cable or a gas line, and because that ultimately is disruptive. So I would say that National Grid Ventures and National Grid writ large is really looking at how to both optimize and be more efficient in our work management and asset management practices, and ultimately squeeze the most asset utilization out of our existing assets so that we don't have to build more as quickly and push, prices out ultimately to all of us as consumers.
I'll just double down on, I think, your last point, which is that first principles still matter, right? Costs matter, pricing matters, right? I think there might be some insensitive buyers in the data center community. If you look at some of the, behind the meter projects like Colossus, et cetera, who are building so much redundancy into the system, right? That the cost curve is just not something that any of us in data center infrastructure would recognize. But for the most part, buyers are still rational, right? And at the end of the day, it's the consumers and it's the businesses who are consuming AI at the end of the day. And that's where, people are still sensitive in terms of price, right? And you still have a lot of rational actors. While there is maybe some, opportunity for riding that price curve down, right, and getting to scale, which I'm sure some other people have lived even more than me. I think having a focus on first principles and not a sense that there's these deep pockets is important, right? We're never going to get. I don't see us moving away from having to look at comparative sources and using that as a benchmark. I mean, a good example is we talked about SMR technology to a little bit in geothermal. When making decisions, inside big companies, my former employer being one of them, you're looking at a competitive benchmark. And if you're looking at the cost per megawatt hour that you think you're going to get from small modular reactors in mid-2035, that benchmark gets in your head, and you're not going to buy anything that's off that cost curve. So it's important to have us align on when these technologies get real, when they hit that viable economic portion, and then think about that as the benchmark that you have to behave. You have to beat. It's not an irrational buyer's market.
Mm-hmm. I can give you a very concrete example. Like, we have a proposal that we submitted last year to a partner that combines Celodyne's platform in a fuel cell, platform in an electrolyzer, platform in a compressor, that ultimately puts it all together and lets you do 24-hour backup power storage. If you had asked me if I would ever propose that in 26, and you asked me that question in 23, I would have told you, no, that's a 2031, 2032 product line, right? Because I wouldn't have expected the premium that people would be willing to pay for power, right? But I submitted it last year. It was a real request, right? So I think this landscape has kind of, if you're able to adapt to it, open up new product opportunities for technology that previously people would have discounted because they're like, no, this is too expensive. Not really, because now suddenly the capability you're trying to enable is different, and the price point for that capability is different.
So should the customers be willing to pay more? Like, as a ratepayer, as a consumer, we're seeing these huge utility increases. I live in California where power is pretty expensive, and yet I'm not consuming more power than I used to. So what are your thoughts on behind the meter versus in front of the meter, and how that affects the whole system and pricing and having people pay different prices?
So, I mean, affordability is front in mind for any of my peers in the utility space, and it's real, all right, because again, they're looking at percentage increases, and we assessed what the cost of one of our high voltage DC projects how it would raise and have an impact on bills, and it was like $1 a month, but it was basically moving renewable energy right into the load pocket and avoid lots of other upgrades that would need to be had. I think the challenge that we have is communicating to the ratepayers and to the communities, because again, they just open their bill and they see a super high power price, which arguably is because of a war in Iran or a war in Ukraine or what have you, but the ability to articulate and explain that is challenging. Nothing is free, right? And so again, the need to speak to stakeholders and explain the benefits that you're getting from the increases is just part and parcel of what you have to do every day, and it's not easy, but we have to double down on that as an industry for people to understand. Specifically for data centers, again, as all the panelists have said, there's a willingness to pay a premium for speed to power, and so you are seeing in the policy realm, and I don't know what's being discussed later today on the policy geopolitical discussion, but lots of tariffs that are coming into place in different parts of the country where you're bringing your own generation, you're basically paying for that generation, and in order to not leave the utilities behind, being able to provide some of the upgrade costs to the utilities so that they can put it in the rate base and earn their regulated return, but ultimately the whole focus is on the loads coming in and paying their way. And I think that's what's going to get things to continue to move. Otherwise, you're going to see a continued backlash, particularly with data center moratoriums kind of and a political will that's pushing against it because they don't see the jobs coming with these AI centers.
And I would agree with that. I think affordability is something that we all need to focus on together, right? And that is, one of the reasons why things like efficiency and what grid care does in terms of using the capacity that exists today is so non-controversial. It's the only non-controversial topic besides nuclear, which ironically is now non-controversial, because you're talking about you're already paying for it, right? Ratepayers are already paying for that grid built to that such low level of utilization. You can increase utilization that is at zero cost to ratepayers. In fact, if you can attractive data centers to your region, you're actually creating a larger rate base, and you can, in practice, actually either increase your investment or reduce rates, right? So it is a very good value proposition to increase utilization and actually create capacity and attract new data centers to your service territory.
Does that create more profit for the utility? Because my understanding is utilities just charge a return on assets on new assets deployed, right? So what you're saying is you're using the assets that are existing in a better way. Do they make more money?
You go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. If you look at, we've done a couple of different analysis of this, and the answer is yes, they can make more money. They're going to be able to make the good investments that are more attractive, right? We're not going to stop making investments, but because you're actually attracting new people to your service territory, by definition, your rate base goes up.
And it comes down to the split, right? You might be bringing your own generation, and there's a certain amount of interconnection, right, that would be paid by the load, but still the regulated utility, even with transmission projects, has certain upgrades that it has to make on its kind of broader system, which ultimately falls into the rate base. But it wouldn't be at the same level if they had to cover all of it.
Yeah. Gary, so competition with China, so 20 nuclear power plants under development there. Any thoughts on that?
Competition with China?
Yeah, when it comes to power.
So if you look up there, the amount of energy, if you look up the projects they're doing in hydro right now, coupled with the number of coal plants they're sending out, solar, wind, nuclear, it's scary. Do I think they're gonna win? Actually, no. Based on what I see, they're basically throwing the money at the problem. So for instance, one internal information that's related to China, related to kind of their solar and wind projects, right? Most people don't realize this. Whenever people publish China put in X amount of megawatts of solar this year, right? If you actually query it and say how much power these things generated, it's like 10-20% capacity factor. Almost no power, basically. It's a project that you would have never done here.
Because there's no demand, or?
No, because they're putting it in the wrong place. Literally. They're putting it in the wrong place. There's no way to get that electricity to where the demand centers are. Basically, classic sun's in the desert, industrial centers are not in the desert, problem. But then the top line they always report is we installed X amount of capacity. And I was like, sure, capacity, but this thing doesn't generate power. That's just bad marketing. Right? Oh, very good marketing, depending on how you want to call it.
Unless you put a data center next to it.
Unless you put a data center next to it, right? So I think they're throwing money at the problem. They might win by brute force. The bigger problem I see, though, is let's go back to kind of like the picks and shovels issue of, say, like batteries. Right? With kind of the tariffs coming in and the need for like a domestic, but not just, speed to power, but a resilient power source and something that's preferably domestic. Yeah, the battery supply chain problem is a big issue right now, right? Like if you want to install 100 megawatts of battery energy storage and you say, I only want to use American cells, I don't think you have a project. It's the honest answer. Right, so one of our customers, actually in the flow battery space, has been getting a lot of traction because of that. Because in their case, all their plates and everything are American manufactured, all the tanks are American manufactured and everything. And now it's kind of crazy. Now you have this premium for power, premium for speed to power, premium for domestic sourcing and so forth. And yeah, all I can say is it's been interesting.
Any other thoughts on this? Otherwise, I'll go to Q&A. So there are microphones in the aisles at the bottom if any of you guys have questions in the last 5 minutes or 3 minutes. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.